It's week one. We're here. We've been waiting. No more thinking, just watching and reacting and being with all of our friends. To all my friends, including the great Chris Allen. And welcome back, everybody. The seat's still warm, just like we like it. And by the way, Dr. Gene won't be joining us on Sunday mornings. However, Football Guys subscribers can still get all of his injury information. Before we jump into questions, and please go ahead and put your questions in the chat here on YouTube, and we'll get to as many as we can and certainly try to pick ones that are relevant for the most people. Chris, let's just go over the injury situations around the league, and we can talk about the injured players and the implications. We'll start with the ones that are easiest to at least know what's going to happen with the injured player. George Kittle's questionable. He can always gnash his teeth and grit it out for his team, but it doesn't look like that. Also, there's a weather situation that could potentially skew this game too. It's a bit of a lopsided matchup, San Francisco at Chicago. We're not going to put Kittle in our lineups, but does that make us more likely to put, say, Brandon Ayuk in?
Absolutely. I think at this point, he's probably the closest or easiest connection to Trey Lance in the passing game, outside of Deebo Samuel, because I don't think anybody's going to go to the bottom of the barrel and look at what the Danny Grays of the world or anything along those lines. So if you are looking to attack the Chicago defense, if you want to do it from an aerial standpoint, I mean, Ayuk is probably the one that has the best chance in order to do that. I mean, just given the way that we've seen him start to progress, over the offseason, I mean, we've heard at least good things from Kyle Shanahan this year about Brandon Ayuk, versus everything that transpired last year. So, and now in his third season, I think he's the best bet. But we'll see. I think my only concern, at least from a weather standpoint, has just been, it does look like there's going to be a little bit of rain. The hardest part to judge, and this is from the things that I do behind the scenes, with weather and all that, it is kind of difficult when you're looking at not just the conditions during the game, but what's going to happen before the game, because it looks like there is going to be at least some decent thunderstorms, or at least some showers in the area beforehand. So if it degrades the field, do you wind up with a sloppy mess? And I think they actually just resodded the field last week, if I'm remembering correctly.
It's one of the worst playing surfaces, right? Isn't Soldier always a terrible playing surface?
Yeah. So those are my biggest concerns, is if anything happens pregame that we just don't know about in terms of field conditions, because during the game itself, it should be relatively tame from a rain perspective. So I can see why the 49ers would be at least cautious about throwing George Kittle out there. We're not going to start him anyway. But for any of the other players involved, Ayuk is probably the one that I want to target the most.
Yeah, Ayuk is a good test of that preseason narrative. Ayuk having a great camp, most outstanding player in camp by some estimations. Clayton Witt in the chat room asked Ayuk or Michael Thomas, which touches on another injury situation. And since we haven't seen Michael Thomas in over a year, coming with the hamstring, likely to play, but I think that we're guessing. I mean, one of the things I'm maybe a little more, we're guessing every week anyway, but I'm a little more honest about this or upfront about this when people are asking me questions about some of these injury situations, because, we could even see as we were watching the Rams running back situation all summer, and they were saying, well, it's like two number ones. And it wasn't even like that. There was one number one, and it wasn't Cam Akers, right? We don't know what Kyron Williams would have done if he hadn't hurt his ankle in the first half, but it was Henderson's backfield. So there's going to be a lot of surprising reveals. And at the very least, you can control for some of this injury information. We know that Michael Thomas is questionable, so he's not 100%. We know that Brandon Ayuk is, and we'll see the big unveil of the San Francisco offense, although it might not be much of an unveil if Chicago doesn't force them to get out of their comfort zone. But like you said, with that playing surface, Drano, Elijah Mitchell, looking like a really good play, especially for DFS. I'm going to try to pick questions that touch on the injury situation, so we can really just jump right in here. Okay. And let's start Ty Landis. I like when we get this information. Knox put him in a hole on Thursday. Tony Pollard or Ramondre Stevenson half PPR. And I'm getting some of these questions. I mean, Chris, this week one shouldn't be a tough week for your running back too, but it is. There's a lot of rolling the dice. So if you had to roll the dice with Ramondre Stevenson down in the heat in Miami or Tony Pollard inside in Dallas, which one would you rather do?
I'd lean more towards Tony Pollard, at least in this case, because Damian Harris is still a larger part of the offense. And this is an offense that, weren't the reports coming out that they were rumored to be trying to scrap their entire offensive game plan just in the last week before week one. And so while I do think throughout the course of this season, Ramondre Stevenson will be the guy that we want him to be, either from a just overall rushing standpoint or even from a target share perspective, Dallas has already kind of tipped their hand in terms of what they want to do with Tony Pollard this season. And we're finally going to get that the target share, or at least putting Tony Pollard in the slot, having him out there for passing down situations, because they don't have any other options. I mean, CeeDee Lamb, of course, but outside of him, I mean, everybody else is hurt. So if Dallas coaching staff has already at least put it out there that they want to use like Tony Pollard in this fashion this year, I mean, the Bucks defensive front, I mean, one of the best in the league at this point. So if they are put into this situation where they are going to have to at least put out some more pass catchers like out on the field, it has to be Pollard at this point. So I think Pollard has like the best avenue or the best route to touches at this point, like over Ramondre Stevenson, also the best chance to score between the two of them, because I don't know what to expect in the Patriots Dolphins game.
Yeah, I think that the Patriots offense could just be a joke, a punchline. Joe Judge and Matt Patricia. What could go wrong?
Exactly.
It looks like, again, testing our preseason narratives, that it's going to be 2-3 down backs with Harris and Stevenson, but there might not be much meat on that bone. We'll see about Dallas offensive line woes, but a lot of buzz. He was working with Tony Pollard with an offensive quality control coach specifically on the slot. By the way, it looks like Jalen Tolbert, who there's some excitement about, he might not even be active. Brian Broaddus said he projected him to be down, and Dennis Houston and Kevontae Turpin to be up. So we'll just watch that situation. I agree that Pollard, you have the explosive play potential. And last year in this game, opened the season also for both of these teams, I think Ezekiel Elliott only had 11 carries. It's still the Bucks don't have Ndamukong Kongsu. They just slide Akeem Hicks in there. Same business as usual. So it could be a rough night. We'll see how the offensive line was on both sides affect that game later on tonight. Justin Hayes, welcome back, everybody. Again, thanks. Great to see the turnout here. And we'll be doing this every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern. James Conner, this one's interesting because there's James Conner, and let's touch really quickly on this. Rondale Moore's out. I wouldn't be surprised if Rondale Moore gets put on injured reserve. As Dr. Gene has taught us, the second injury, and I don't know that it was specifically an aggravation of the previous leg injury, but when we see these compensation injuries, these cascade injuries, it usually ends up worse than the initial injury. Greg Dortch in your deep dynasty leagues, he's only 24. A lot of people like Dortch. Don't be surprised if Dortch changes the narrative here. He's had a great summer. Zach Ertz, let's touch on him real quick before I get into Justin Haynes' question here, Chris. Ertz, according to Adam Schefter, likely to play. I think because of the nature of the tight end position, where I say in other situations you can control for the injury. Let's try not to play the player with the injury. At tight end, chances are your other option. I mean, hey, if your other option is Dallas Goedert or TJ Hawkinson, sure. But if we're talking about below that line where we're just rolling the dice with a David Njoku or Mo Alley Cox or Irv Smith or whoever, I think you roll with an injured Ertz. You want to give people a little more caution, or do you feel like, hey, at this point, if you got him, you got to play him?
No, I don't. Just depends on like who else is out on your waiver wire, because like you mentioned, there could be at least some guys that provide some hope. The Gerald Everetts of the world,
sure. With the Donald Parham hurt,
So I mean, there are some situations where you could envision a guy getting, I wouldn't say like the same number of targets as Zach Ertz would be in his offense with the Cardinals, but you could at least see the chance for like with Mo Alley Cox, like could they get into the red zone area and he wind up just falling into the end zone or like catching one of the targets like down there. It's entirely possible. So I think that's where you got to like squint and tell yourself that type of story where it might not come out the way that you want it to regarding the total targets, like because Zach Ertz, we could expect if he was healthy to get 8 to 10 targets, because who else is supposed to be catching those targets or earning any of those targets in that offense without Rondale Moore? I mean, and Marquise Brown essentially being like the number one guy. AJ Green, okay, fine.
Right.
But it's again, it's a condensed target tree, and you don't have that like in many other situations at the tight end position. So I think if you have Ertz, you probably do have to play him. But if you do have a couple of those options out on the wire, like you mentioned, so it's like Irv Smith, Gerald Everett, Mo Alley Cox, I mean, it's possible that you could start those guys.
Likely.
Exactly. Yes.
I mean, look, we're not going to talk you out of it. I mean, look, if you want to get frisky, you want to try one of those options, that's great. And I think that the bottom line here is with Arizona is when we're talking about, and of course they have Marquise Brown, like you said. Marquise Brown get a ton of targets in this game, but when we're talking about AJ Green and Greg Dortch and Andy Isabella, it's not going to be a great afternoon for the Arizona offense. It might be a really good afternoon for Kansas City's offense. So with that in mind, we got James Conner or Terry McLaurin in a half PPR. Half PPR would definitely favor the running back. Is it that simple, or is there more to this one?
No, I don't think so. It's if we're looking at, let's see, the path to touches, but also touchdown equity, like has to be like factored into this. And while I don't think it's going to be, very difficult like for the Commanders to move the ball against the Jaguars defense, but it's just once they get into the red zone, can we expect to like Terry McLaurin to continue to get those targets, or do we see Ron Rivera just summarily say, all right, Carson Wentz, like, okay, you got us here, like we'll take it in from at this point. We don't want to see some of the same gaffes that we saw from you like in Indianapolis. So like we'll just go ahead and let's keep things kosher. Let's keep things simple. And with James Conner, with Arizona running at one of like the highest paces like in the league in terms of like neutral pace per play, it's easier, and we already know like what his role is on that team, not just as the every down back, but the goal line back, also securing a number of targets as well. I mean, Conner has like, he is one of those, I don't want to say bell cow backs or anything like that, but he does have that versatile skill set where he should be on the field like the entirety of the entirety of the offense. So if we're wondering about, or if we have any concerns about like targets and touches, I mean, Conner has that in spades. So I would go with him, like at least in the final flex spot.
Yeah, like you said with McLaurin, that also involves counting on Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz playing Jacksonville in back-to-back games. That'd be interesting, right?
Yeah.
And I think real quickly while we're on Washington, any guidance for folks that are staring at Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissick and wondering, am I really going to start one of these guys, or does the uncertainty drive us away from this backfield?
For at least for right now, I wouldn't have any pushback on a fantasy manager that just wanted to wait and see like what this is going to look like. And then of course, like with the at least good news like coming out of Brian Robinson's camp about he could be back here soon. It's just, let's see where the coaching staff is comfortable like with playing each of them and what situations they want to play them in. And if Antonio Gibson does kind of like maintain like most of the starting role like he did in like the past couple of seasons, okay, fine. At least we have something to lean on over the next couple of weeks before Robinson like gets back into the active lineup. But for right now, I would have, it's almost the same approach to what we were looking at with the Darrell Henderson, like Cam Akers thing. It's like, well, we knew at least the coaching staff kind of gave us these notes or gave us these clues that there was going to be a split backfield between the two. And so far, I mean, Washington like has pretty much given us the same types of clues, like with moving Antonio Gibson around and having him do different duties like throughout the offseason. I mean, that sort of thing. So there is enough uncertainty where if you wanted to take a step back and say, well, based off of their ADPs, you have other options in your lineup anyway. So you don't necessarily have to start them unless you, I don't know, let's say if you started Devin Singletary or something like that, and you might have yourself in a hole. But overall, I think where they were drafted at, you don't need to have them in your lineup for this week if you have other options.
Yeah, just Washington. There's some teams, we talked about this with New England. There's some teams, Chris, that I'm on offensive collapse watch, let's say.
I like that.
I mean, just the idea that we're watching week one, not just as an indication about the individual player values, but the overall situation. Like you said, we've been paying attention to all this stuff. Okay. Let's get some more data points as we go through here on some injured players. We can just tee these up real quick. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Michael Thomas or Christian Kirk in a half PPR. Again, I think that, I'm not that confident in Kirk. I want to see what Trevor Lawrence is going to do, but I'll still go Kirk over Thomas today, especially in half PPR. Yeah. Same. Ingram, speaking of that Jacksonville offense, Ingram or roll the dice on Ertz?
I'd still keep Ertz in there over Ingram at this point.
Ingram, there's certain players that's like you got to earn your way back into our circle of trust.
Bingo.
And I think that Ingram is definitely on that list at this point. Shake and bake 145. PPR, Rashad Bateman or Elijah Moore. These guys going against each other. And a couple of things to unpeel here. With Bateman, just tossing it out there. This will be fun. Bateman and Sauce Gardner.
I was just going to say that. Yes.
That's going to be fun. And by the way, we're also going to probably have some Michael Pittman and Derek Stingley in the Indianapolis-Houston game. So some rookie corners showing what they're about right away. And then Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore had an 8 for 141 and a touchdown line with Joe Flacco last year. However, this year you have, let's see, the left tackle for the Jets in the last month has been, well, going into camp, I think we expected to be Mekhi Becton. Then it was George Fant. Then Becton goes down. They sign Dwayne Brown. So Fant goes to right tackle. Dwayne Brown's at left tackle, as they were when they were with the Seahawks. Then Dwayne Brown goes down. I'm almost out of breath here. And now Fant's back at left tackle, and rookie fourth rounder Max Mitchell will start at right tackle against the Ravens this week. So it's not as simple, but Elijah Moore or Rashad Bateman facing each other against up there in East Rutherford. What do you think?
For me, at least in week one, I would go with Rashad Bateman here. I mean, everything that we've seen so far, like coming out of Ravens training camp, I mean, almost every single beat writer, it didn't matter like what the type of coverage it was, Rashad Bateman was getting open. And we wanted to see this type of improvement or this step forward from him after last season. While I think he was a disappointment in the box score, I think in the games that he was healthy and played with Lamar, like we saw the flashes like of what they wanted to do and how they want this offense, so this passing offense to work in the future. And without any other reliable options, like outside of like Mark Andrews, hopefully Isaiah Likely will see him like on the field and earning some targets today. I mean, it does need to be like Rashad Bateman. And while I do think like his matchup against Sauce Gardner is going to be like one of those like get your popcorn out, like let's sit down and actually watch like actual football. But for the times that he's not, because it's not like he's going to be like an actual like shadow coverage, like that sort of thing. But the times that he's not, he should be able to get open at will against this Jets secondary. So I want to see that. I want to see how this passing offense between Lamar and Rashad Bateman has grown like over the past year or so that we can actually see that Bateman get to or ascend to the heights that we expect him to throughout the offseason.
Yeah, and the Ravens line, by the way, Ronnie Stanley's not going to be out there for this one. Their best offensive lineman, but it still should be better than last year. They got Tyler Linderbaum, first-round pick. Center has been a real problem for this team. The Jets' defensive line might be really good, folks. This could be actually, when I step back and think about this could be one of those offensive futility games where we think there's points here. But I would probably, and this is close enough that Elijah Moore's talent is just so tantalizing. Although, what does it mean? How perverse is it, Chris, that Zach Wilson has us so twisted that we think Joe Flacco in is a good thing? Like, yay, yes. Joe Flacco. Yay, Joe Flacco in December of his career is in. We can play our Jets. I don't know. I would probably go with more strictly on talent, but this is far from clear. And I think that, again, that Jets, remember, they get Jermaine Johnson, first-round pick. Carl Lawson is back from his Achilles, and so they're getting, that's another addition. That was their big offseason addition last year in the pass rush. Of course, they got Quinnen Williams. They got John Franklin Myers up there, who's always a handful. So this could be a long afternoon. Adam Lovett has a great one. And by the way, Shake and Bake asked you about drop White or drop Herbert for a kicker. I think you drop Herbert just because White is in a better offense. What do you think, Chris?
I agree with that. Yeah.
But we, that can change real quickly if David Montgomery limps off field, or we could see an unveil. That's another one where new regime. We're not quite sure how that split's going to go. But with Rachaad White, it sounds like he's going to have a role, and he could add maybe more value to targets out of the backfield than Leonard Fournette. Okay, Adam Lovett has a good one here. A.J. Dillon or Dameon Pierce? You knew we were going to talk about Dameon Pierce today.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And I want to say Dameon Pierce. I really do. But and you are the mayor of Narrative Street.
Yes, sir.
So let's walk down this narrative. Like, what is the chances that Green Bay, with their, the offensive line, at least now it looks like it's relatively intact. And also with Minnesota's defense, how can we not see a case where Minnesota is up similar to where the Bills and Rams were like towards the end of the game, and it's not just A.J. Dillon just rumbling in for at least one, if not like two touchdowns, like come second half, like unless we expect Minnesota to be able to keep up with Green Bay at this point. I just don't know. Green Bay's defense is now one of the best in the league. It might take a little bit of time for them to gel, but at least so far, like they do look like one of the best secondaries, like especially up front. They are going to have a tough time getting Dalvin Cook going today. So it's just, I can see a scenario where it's just A.J. Dillon to completely close out this game. I want to say Dameon Pierce, but at the same time, there's so much uncertainty regarding what his workload is going to look like straight out of the gate. Is Rex Burkhead going to be getting some of that passing work? I don't know. Is he even going to mix in? Like, is Dameon Pierce going to be out there on the third down, short yardage? All of the situations that we expect him to. I want him to be in those roles, but can we expect Houston's coaching staff to act rationally? And we just don't know. So like, despite him having like the starter status, it's just harder for me to see his role like versus AJ Dillon. We know what AJ Dillon is going to be like in tandem with Aaron Jones. So it's just, I lean Dameon Pierce, but I understand if other folks like want to like shoot for the moon, like with AJ Dillon, because that's the proposition that you're making.
Yeah, but starting Dameon Pierce is like your new toy. You want to play with your new toy. That's great. And I'm not going to talk anybody out of that. And it is week 1 and we're doing some guesswork here, but I believe, Chris, that by the end of today, people will realize AJ Dillon should have been a 3rd round pick, maybe a 2nd round pick. I think this offense is going to run through the backfield. I think it's going to be a good offense. And I think AJ Dillon, like you said, I mean, this game was 34-31 last year, I think, when the one in Minnesota. And I just think AJ Dillon, let me put it this way. AJ Dillon's one of those players that's easy for me to say. If you're asking me a question where AJ Dillon's one of the options, based on the perception of AJ Dillon's value today, the answer is going to be AJ Dillon. Now, some of the running backs in the AJ Dillon questions next week, Chris, might be better running backs because the perception of AJ Dillon will be better. But right now, AJ Dillon, 4th, 5th round pick, and the running backs that people are honestly weighing him against, or flex plays that people are honestly weighing him against, 99 or 100 times out of 100 today, I'm going to tell you to play AJ Dillon. That being said, I'm not saying you're crazy if you go with Pierce here because you were excited. Maybe you drafted early. You got Pierce like in the 12th round. You want to show everyone how smart you are. I mean, I'm even putting I might be flexing Isaiah Likely in a league or two just because of how much fun it will be if he has another performance like he did in the preseason. Fantasy football, it's supposed to be fun. Speaking of these running back situations, we already mentioned Dave Montgomery. Drem ML asks, Josh Jacobs or David Montgomery in a PPR? And again, these are running backs. We have preseason narratives. We have a wider range of outcomes. We're not quite sure what we're going to see from these guys. So with uncertainty over both Jacobs and Montgomery, who would you lean towards?
I would probably lean towards David Montgomery, but I don't feel great about it because it's just looking at the way that the Raiders have now constructed their offense. Can we even see Josh Jacobs even being in consideration for targets? It's like outside of their normal function, and I cannot. I mean, with Devontae Adams already being there, Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller with his extension. I mean, there's so many other options now for Derek Carr. And like once they get into the red zone, he might get a few touches here and there, but they've also been just as happy to feature Zamir White like throughout the preseason. So it's just, for me, looking at the way that Chicago's offense looks like, they just have, again, it's more of a narrow group of players or skill position players that they have right now. So David Montgomery out, because we were just talking about Khalil Herbert a bit ago, unless there is some sort of significant shift in the way that they're going to roll out their personnel, like if they want to see more of a 2-back split, like with Khalil Herbert and David Montgomery,
right?
I can see David Montgomery having at least the most touches like out of that backfield. Whereas when it comes to Josh Jacobs, they've been fairly clear that they do like Zamir White and they want to try and use him. And then, of course, with the passing game options, it just makes Josh Jacobs' ceiling for touches like much more limited than David Montgomery's, even though I would say Chicago is in a much worse situation, like as a whole, like than the Raiders.
Yeah, it's tough because I think as of right now, I've got Montgomery with 64 total yards, 40% chance at a touchdown, and 3 receptions. And I've got Jacobs at, let's see, this is where projections can really fail us, right? Because I've got Jacobs at 68 total yards, 2 receptions, and a 50-50 shot at touchdown, a little better shot of a touchdown because of offense. But both of those projections reflect uncertainty. Probably they will lead their backfields in yards and touches, but maybe not by much. With that coin flip, I probably would go with Jacobs just because he'll be in more positions to score, and we'll just see how miserable the Bears offense is. That's another thing. There's going to be, Chris, there's going to be some games this week. I think the Rams offense is one that qualifies already, where it's going to be hard to know what we learned about these offenses that have bad afternoons, to know the why. Is it factors that are more central to the offense? Is it the opponent? Is it that opponent can expose those weaknesses? Because that's the thing. The Bears coming in with lots of offensive line questions. The 49ers, Nick Bosa, this is not the defense you want to face. So when the big unveil, what's Luke Getsy going to do? What are the priorities for this offense? What are they going to do to set Justin Fields up for success? We might not have a good answer. The car might not get out of the driveway. That's what I've been saying, is you need the offensive line to get the car out of the driveway to even see like how it's handling and how the speed the engine can get up to and things like that. I want to talk about both these guys. Speaking of San Francisco, just because I want to touch on them. David Bowie asks, and it's a desperation play, and in some ways, the desperation plays are the most fun because it's that last call, and maybe picking the player who got 8 points instead of the player who got 4 can be the difference. And both of these guys, I think, are worth mentioning. And they're both players that, again, we could perceive very differently in value. Both of these guys could be among the top waiver wire pickups of next week. All right. And this is a 0.5 PPR, which skews it a little bit away from Jerick McKinnon, or at least if it was a PPR, we'd be more inclined to say Jerick McKinnon, but it still might be the answer here, or Jeff Wilson. I think both of these running backs are backs. Like right now, if you're watching the show, go to your waiver wire and see if they're out there. And if there's somebody that you're iffy about, like you took somebody in the last week or two and their situation doesn't look as good, you took, whatever, Trey Sermon or something like that. This is both of these running backs, I think, have a lot of potential for value growth as we watch the games today. Which one would you go with, David? What do you think about McKinnon and Wilson?
So I would lean more towards Jerick McKinnon at this point, because like you mentioned, Jeff Wilson always has that penchant for just popping up for like 60 yards and 2 touchdowns or something along those lines, just because of the way that he's used within the offense. But at least for right now, if we believe that with Trey Lance like under center, they're more likely to use him like as a rusher with Kyle Shanahan kind of designing out like those types of touches and utilizing Lance like as a runner, because he's just an imposing type of person. But from that standpoint, it might limit the amount of carries that we would see for Jeff Wilson, like in week 1, like in the big reveal, like for the San Francisco offense, like with Trey Lance, like at the helm. So I would lean more towards Jerick McKinnon, just because we have seen at least for the Kansas City Chiefs, I mean, top 5 in pass rate over expectation, not just overall, but in the red zone as well. Limited, I would not actually take that back, not limited, but it's just the number of pass catchers that they have. It's just, we have uncertainty across the board outside of Travis Kelce, outside of, let's say, even like Juju Smith-Schuster, I think at this point, just because of the fact that he's going to be manning the slot for primarily this season. What can we expect out of the rest of that group, whether it's Sky Moore, whether it's Marquez Valdes-Scantling, whether it's even Clyde Edwards-Helaire, if they want to finally try and use him in the passing game? They've seemed more comfortable using Jerick McKinnon in that role. So in today's game, like against Arizona, if the passing options there is some uncertainty associated with the pass catching options, like for the Kansas City Chiefs, I would lean into like some of that uncertainty and try and like start Jerick McKinnon before we really have an understanding of, well, what's that target structure going to look like moving forward. So I do like Jerick McKinnon in that role for today.
Yeah, I think McKinnon's a good look at the Arizona defense, folks. JJ Watt is out. Marcus Golden and is there a curse here? You had Antonio Williams, one of the starting corners, who wasn't even supposed to be a starting corner. Jeff Gladney, rest in peace. I was hoping to see his redemption story come to fruition. It was a rough offseason for Arizona's offense. You have a cooking accident where you spilled boiling oil or something, right? You have Marcus Golden, a weight dropped on his toe, and JJ Watt just, oh man, his body got used up, I think, earlier in his career. And you're facing Kansas City. I just think it's going to be a successful game for Kansas City's offense. And if you don't like Clyde Edwards-Helaire is another guy, by the way, that chances are if you have Clyde Edwards-Helaire in a question for me today, I'm going to say play Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He was a 6th or 7th round pick. He is the answer to your running back 2 woes today, partially because of this matchup. But if you don't like Edwards-Helaire, if you just say, I don't trust him, it's not going to happen, then McKinnon should be the guy you're on, not Pacheco, not Ronald Jones. And with Jeff Wilson, if you're not convinced of Elijah Mitchell's durability, then it's Wilson. Clearly, we've gotten many signals from different sources covering the team that Wilson is the backup, and we'll see about Jordan Mason and Tyrion Davis-Price. And yes, Kyle Shanahan, you never know. But Wilson's a known quantity in this offense. And even in this game today, especially because I think what we're going to see with Elijah Mitchell this year is he's rarely going to get over 20 touches. There were some games last year we had, 27 carries. They really drew it, but I think they understood he missed time 3 different times. They need to pace him. So I think especially in a game like today where San Francisco could be nursing a big lead in the second half, it could be a Jeff Wilson game. So I think there's paths for both of these running backs, Chris, to be top 20 running backs this week. It wouldn't blink an eye. You're looking for some DFS diversity and things like that. Both of these guys, it's easy to tell a story of how they hit. I agree with you. I like Jerick McKinnon as a guy maybe that has a chance for more explosive plays. And I probably would go with McKinnon, but they're both good plays. We haven't talked about Chris Godwin yet. So let's go ahead and get a Godwin question in here from Scotty O. We're going to go about another 10 or 15 minutes, folks. And remember, football guys, we're going to have you covered, multiple sets of projections, Dr. Gene's injury information. We have a lot to help you through your week 1 decisions. But this week, more than any, it feels like week 1 and week 17 are the weeks that we say, hey, we'll give you advice, but really these are weeks to trust your gut because you're going on about as much as we are. And in week 17, if you made it that far, then why are you asking me? I should be asking you, right? But Scotty O is asking us, 0.5 PPR needs one. Godwin tonight. And what we have about Chris Godwin is this. He's expected to play. He did get in full practices. He was in a non-contact jersey for, I think, the Thursday practice. Dr. Gene said likely to play, might be on pitch count. He's expected maybe 25 snaps and maybe 5 targets, not necessarily in high leverage, but it is Dallas's secondary, which is like a boom bust secondary. Godwin, Robert Woods coming back from an ACL against the Giants, the new number 1 receiver for Tennessee. Amari Cooper against Carolina in the Baker Mayfield revenge game. Did you read some of that stuff between Myles Garrett and Baker Mayfield, by the way? Did you see some of that stuff this week?
No, I didn't see that.
Ooh, awkward.
Yeah.
Awkward. Very awkward. Let me put it this way. If you thought that the locker room wasn't behind Baker Mayfield, you were probably right. Kareem Hunt in that same game, and George Pickens, speaking of new toys and playing with new toys. So, Scotty, we have 5 options here. Godwin, Woods, Cooper, Hunt, and Pickens. Who stands out?
For me, at least, it's very difficult for me to trust like Chris Godwin, like right out of the gate. I mean, they've already indicated that there's going to be put on some sort of pitch count like for tonight, even though that with the passing game, like for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I mean, they have been like top 3, if I'm remembering correctly, in pass rate over expectation. So the volume should definitely be there. But with his injury, I mean, he's been practicing in a non-contact jersey throughout most of the week. So it's very difficult for me to trust him this week. Could I interest anybody in a Robert Woods recommendation, though? At least that's kind of where I'm sitting at, because that's the name that sticks out. Because do you really want to, like, if I'm looking at the other names and just thinking about the offenses they're attached to, like Amari Cooper attached to Jacoby Brissett, not moving the needle for me here. And again, Kareem Hunt, like in the same game, despite the fact that he is not reliant on Jacoby Brissett, but he's still splitting time with Nick Chubb. So again, if I don't have to try and look at a guy that's already be in a timeshare, at least I'll try and look elsewhere. George Pickens, it does seem like if they are going to be out there in 3 wide receiver sets, because it looks like Deontay Johnson's going to give it a go today, it's going to be both Johnson and Pickens on the perimeter with Chase Claypool in the slot. So if he's going to be seeing like perimeter coverage, like from Cincinnati's like defensive secondary, so that means he's going to see what Awuzie. I mean, so it's entirely possible. I mean, I guess it could be Eli Apple, but either one of the two, I mean, fairly good like defensive coverage for a rookie. While I do think Pickens is going to be one of the better rookie wide receivers from this class, this is not the game that I would want to start him in like for out of week 1. So Robert Woods going up against the Giants, I mean, depleted secondary. I mean, even if you don't believe in Tannehill, or even if you don't believe in this offense, like from this passing offense, and you think it's just going to be the Derrick Henry show, how easy do you think it's going to be? How easy do you think the Titans are going to be able to move the ball against this defense? I mean, they jettisoned James Bradbury. I mean, who else like is supposed to be able to cover like Robert Woods at this point? So I would lean like Robert Woods, to be quite honest, out of this entire group, just because again, I can't trust Godwin in week 1. I think you're muted.
Muted. I'm back. I think Godwin is one you eliminate, although again, there's no overwhelming clear choice, so I'm not going to say you're crazy if you play Godwin. I like that you highlighted Woods there, and I think it's just a question of how many pass attempts. Give me an over under on Ryan Tannehill pass attempts. Like as long as he gets over 16 pass attempts, Woods is probably going to be okay. There's a chance he won't have to, because as you mentioned with that Giants defense, things might come easy for this Titans offense. Pickens, like Pierce, is that fun play. What you hope with Pickens, and I'll say this, especially because people are also smartly adding in information of I was facing Stephon Diggs or I played Dawson Knox. So I do think Pickens clearly has the highest ceiling of anybody in this group.
That's absolutely
so I'm a ceiling guy. I might go with Pickens. I think Woods is clearly the floor guy, and I think Woods is another one where at the end of the day we might revise and say, wow, he should have been going in the 6th or 7th round. Woods should have been going higher. He was the number 1 for this offense. Okay, let's see what else we got here. I know we got some different tight end questions. Again, this is getting into fun. I'll just ask you because tight end is certainly a position where people might be just rubbing two sticks together and hoping something happens. With George Kittle sitting, Adam said Gerald Everett or Isaiah Likely.
Everett for me at this point, but I know who you're going to say.
Yeah, well, I just think that Everett is the safer play. Everett's safer in so much as with Don Parham sitting, Everett's more likely to get opportunities, high value opportunities. Like I've gotten a few Josh Palmer questions, and it's tough when you're weighing Josh Palmer against Michael Thomas or Josh Palmer against Chris Godwin or some of these other guys that we know may play, Russell Gage, that Drake London, that may play but may not be themselves. I mean, they're all expected to play. Likely, again, it's what we have in common here: Pierce, Pickens, Likely, and by the way, Olave is probably the best rookie start today, I think. He's probably the rookie I have the highest confidence level in today. And if Michael Thomas really isn't 100%, you like Olave even more. There's Atlanta, another one of those defenses we're going to pick on when we're setting lineups. But with the rookies, the fun thing about playing rookies, and hey, for every rookie that breaks out in week one, there's a Zach Studfeld. So, I mean, we can get over our skis a little bit on these rookies. But when we've seen that trajectory for these rookies, and I think particularly with Likely, it started back in the spring. With Pierce and Pickens, it really got rolling once we got to camp. And with Likely, it didn't slow down in camp. There's that fun element of liking to lord it over the rest of your league. Not only was I smart enough to take this player, I was smart enough to start them. And maybe that first week shows us we have a new star on our hands. And I think Pickens maybe is the most likely to give us that, where Mitchell Trubisky offensive line, it doesn't matter because he's that good. With Likely, I just think that that's a player that could have the matchup, and I'm really interested to watch the chemistry between Lamar Jackson and Isaiah Likely the summer that he has had there. Drew wrote a similar data point because I know a lot of people are going to be struggling with tight end. Everett or Irv Smith today in a PPR?
Still lean Everett, but I can understand without really understanding like how that passing tree, like outside of course Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, how that passing tree is going to work out. Because do we see KJ Osborne really stepping into that third wide receiver role and him being like a larger part of the offense, or do they try and stick with at least parts and pieces of how the offense used to run like last year, at least just for week one, like up against a divisional opponent? I can see that happening, and Irv Smith like having a few extra targets for this week. At least for me, give me the Chargers offense, or at least give me pieces of the Chargers offense if I can.
Yeah, and again, some of these questions, because it's week one and because we're flying on instruments in some of these situations, going on the quality offense is a good tiebreaker. A looking forward question from Chris Locklear. We're going to have about another 5 minutes, folks. And again, and you can catch me on Twitter as we get closer to game time. I'll try to hit some of the questions there. And otherwise, we'll just sit back, relax, maybe not relax, as we watch all of our, but enjoy. Chris, I had a looking forward question real quick. Given the Rams backfield situation, is it a good time to sell Darrell Henderson? Full PPR, some upside stashes available. I would not sell Darrell Henderson because they get Atlanta next week. And that could easily be a get right week where the worries about the offensive line, the worries about Allen Robinson, the worries about Matthew Stafford. By the way, this morning, Adam Schefter putting out there that the Rams were going to go after Jimmy Garoppolo if he was released.
Yeah,
so there's no way to read anything to that, but they're not 100% convinced about Matthew Stafford's elbow making the season. Another reason, maybe to sell Henderson, but not sell him this week because his value could definitely take a leap. Now with Cam Akers, real quick, I want to put out there because Kyron Williams has a high ankle sprain. So I think they have to give Akers more opportunities. Now, if you don't think Akers can do anything with it, well, then there's your answer. But it seems like based on what we're seeing from the Rams, that it's not a physical thing with Akers. It's not because his Achilles never let him get back to full strength. It's a mental thing. That's where it seems like Sean. So now either way, that might say, I don't care, mental, physical, he's not earning trust. Either way, Henderson's going to get that opportunity. Do you have anything different as far as advice on what people should do if they have Darrell Henderson right now?
No, I think holding on to him at this point is your best bet, because who are you realistically realistically selling him for? If you're aiming it, like in the scenario that you put out there about being able to have a get right game against Atlanta next week. If Cam Akers isn't really coming back, or if Darrell Henderson really takes over a larger workload or a larger share of the workload like in this offense, you can package that narrative and try and trade for him. But who are you getting? Like a top 24 wide receiver, or like, what is the range that we're talking about here when you're talking about trying to flip him or sell high? So I guess unless there's a massive return on that type of investment, then no. I mean, we already know that. I would say we should give like Sean McVay and the Rams like the benefit of the doubt of being able to adjust to what we just saw against one of the, if not like the toughest defense like in the league at this point. So if we can say that not every week is going to be them going up against the Bills, then things should get better. They should have like more chances at touchdowns. They should have more chances at being able to at least put their running backs in positions to succeed. And then Darrell Henderson should be a productive back where, at least for the most part, throughout the entirety of a 17 or 15, 16, 17 week fantasy football season, you're going to have those weeks where you're going to need a Darrell Henderson like on your roster. Like you're going to need a solid RB2, like sitting there on your bench, like 4 weeks where it's either bye week, somebody gets hurt, has a down week, or whatever the case may be. So I would hold on to Darrell Henderson. And if you want to try and sell him, wait for those trade offers to come to you versus you making those offers.
Yeah, his value could triple next week with a 100-yard game and a touchdown. And I think the larger point here, folks, is we will recontextualize what happens in week 1 based on what happens in week 2, week 3, week 4. And I think Chris is right to point out that we didn't really get to see the Rams offense the way they want to run it. And it may well be that when teams face the Bills, rarely will we see a team run their offense the way they want to run it when they face the Bills. The Bills have an excellent recipe. They look like a team possessed, and they have an excellent recipe with so much talent on the defensive line. They've been investing there. They have good off-ball linebackers, Edmonds and Milano, who can handle their jobs. And then they have Poyer and Hyde in those 2 high safety looks that are just going to make it tough on passing games. And they're going to be able to sit back and force quarterbacks to be patient while the pressure is bearing down on them. It actually could still lead. I mean, Cooper Kupp could even surpass last year's numbers, maybe not on a yards per catch level, but because that's what's going to work. What else is going to work? We'll see. Certainly against the Bills, not maybe a lot. Richard Scanlon asked, Edmonds over Zeke in a 0.5 PPR. What's up, Richard?
I don't mind that. I mean, if we're looking at the Miami's passing offense, I'm really excited to see like the big reveal for Miami's passing offense for today. Like Tyreek Hill, I think is a really solid DFS play for folks that are looking into that sort of thing. But like Edmonds on his own, I mean, we know why like Mike McDaniel like wanted to bring him like into this offense, and having that sort of upside, like having that sort of the ability to create explosives just from the running game, like that has been like San Francisco's like signature thing for the past like few seasons. And even though that they bring in like Teron Armstead, but they still have a number of potholes like along their offensive line. So while I don't think Edmonds is going to have like the greatest like rushing like box score total, but his ability as a receiver, like one of the top like most efficient like receivers like at the running back position like last year, he can be that guy like for Miami. So if they do wind up either falling behind or even just having to compete like against the Patriots like defensive front, like Edmonds I think should be the one to at least return the most value from that standpoint. And what was it, half PPR league? I would definitely do that.
Yeah, and I think that we just can't forecast a lot of success for Zeke tonight, not against Tampa Bay. And you hope for rational coaching from Kellen Moore. We talked about Tony Pollard. With Chase Edmonds, I'm interested to see from Raheem Mostert. Remember, Mostert is the guy who knows this system already, and Edmonds is the guy they projected to be a good fit in this system. But you touched on Miami's defense. I just think that Miami, pick either defense. This would just be a defense game here. And I don't think it's going to be the game to really rekindle that, hey, Tua's fine, everything's going to be okay in Miami at quarterback narrative. This is going to be a stalemate. I think the Olympic sport I use as a comparison, Chris, is like Greco-Roman wrestling, where you just lean on each other, grapple, but there's not a lot of productivity on offense. Here in this one, before we sign off, Chris, since we talked about Miami, New England, really quick with the heat down there. And I think New England flew down to Palm Beach this week for their practices. That's not something we see often. Is that something that is at least on your radar, weather, for just watching to see how this goes as teams come down to Miami when it's still hot?
Yeah, definitely. And Bill Belichick, I think he's actually been pretty good about making his teams practice in the type of environment that they're going to be playing in. I remember a couple of years ago, he had them like simulating like picking up picking up a ball like after he like dunked it in water because he knew like the rain was going to come in like in a week's upcoming game. So for this week, like the Heat, not a big thing. It's just more about, you might see a couple of players like coming in and out of the lineup just to get like hydration, like IV shots, like that sort of thing. We've seen it like beforehand when Tampa Bay has played down there. Like Mike Evans has had to come out like every now and again, like in order to do something like that to stay hydrated. So while I don't think it's going to affect the overall game, it's entirely possible you'll see some of the players just like head off to the sideline. You see them like, grabbing some extra water, having to run back to the locker room or something like that at halftime or whatever to like get IV shots. But that's the most. I mean, but overall, like, will it be a significant impact to the game? No, I don't think so. But you might hear, like, if you're watching the game live, you might hear like the commentating crew, like, or the camera like pan over to the sidelines, and guys are just like, have the towels over their head, like getting water or like things of that nature. But it shouldn't be, from a fantasy standpoint, it shouldn't be a big impact at all.
May see those splits, like the Stevenson Harris split, stay more intact. And maybe if the Miami running game really is crisply executing, and that's another thing I want to toss out there, is just folks have thinking in the background here, some of these new offenses that we're going to watch unveil, the Giants, Jacksonville. We talked about Chicago. Maybe let's not get too ahead of ourselves and think that what happens today is the measure of how these things are going to go for these offenses.
Absolutely.
By week 4, week 6, week 8. I talked about this week, Chris. A shortened preseason. I think we've said that week 1, week 2, it's kind of part of the preseason now. So maybe we should, we have to react. It's important to react. It's appropriate to react. And I know everybody's going to say don't overreact. But certainly when we're talking about installs of new offenses with new quarterbacks, teams with just new regimes, maybe now Minnesota could be an exception because Kirk Cousins is a total professional, and I think that they're going to be up to speed pretty quickly, and they're pretty excited about what they have going on there. Indianapolis with a veteran quarterback, they've been excited. So those are ones maybe where we might see some early results. But and always do this one. I want to give you one more chance. Any questions? Any players that you're agonizing about? Any decisions that you have are keeping you up last night as we were going into Sunday morning?
I think the biggest one is going to be the 49ers offense, because I did draft Trey Lance in a couple of leagues as my starting quarterback, and just what should we expect like from this offense? I mean, for the more that we've continued to hear about the 49ers and just the way that like keeping Jimmy Garoppolo there, the latest story about like Trey Lance getting denied, getting named as one of the captains like for the team. It's just like just little bits and pieces of things where it's just like, the fantasy community has been sold on Trey Lance like since he stepped out onto since he was drafted like by the 49ers, but just feels more and more like Kyle Shanahan is not sold on Trey Lance, like for whatever reason. And so I think that's my biggest concern, even though they do have on paper one of the better matchups, or one of the best like matchups like in week 1. But just, can we really expect Kyle Shanahan to allow Trey Lance to be Trey Lance and to pilot this offense the way that we would expect it to? And I'm not sure. Like, I'm expecting big things, but I don't know if it's going to happen or not.
Yeah. With Trey Lance, he's a young man. How old is Trey Lance? Is he 21?
I think so. Yeah, 22. Yeah.
I'm going to look. He's 22. He just turned 22 in May. What a situation to be put in where everything you do is going to be scrutinized. Yeah. And certainly it won't take long. It's not quite the New York media market, but it won't take long. If there's any perception that San Francisco, Chris, it might not even be they lose because of Trey Lance. It's just they should have won more comfortably if Trey Lance had made more throws. Yeah. And I think especially where you see those easy throws that this offense sets up, scheming players open, if Trey Lance isn't making those throws, then you're going to start hearing it. But at the same time, I don't think it really affects our calculation of Trey Lance's value, because if he's going to be good, he's going to be good whether or not Jimmy Garoppolo is the backup. And he wasn't going to be good even if Garoppolo hadn't returned to the team. Like we saw last year when Jalen Hurts wasn't making those easy throws, they went to truly run heavy offense in Philadelphia, and he was not a quarterback one for fantasy in the second half of the year.
Mhm.
So we'll see. And Trey Lance may get more runs by design. I do think, just adding one more postscript to the San Francisco offense conversation, I do think that while we're talking about Kyle Shanahan being crafty and you can never trust him, I don't think we saw anything from the real San Francisco offense in the preseason.
Oh,
I
believe that.
I
Yeah.
think what the Bears are going to see, and this might give you a nudge to play your 49ers, whoever they are today, because they've got Kyler Gordon, they've got Jawan Brisker, 2 rookies in the back half. And what does the Kyle Shanahan offense do? It puts defensive players in binds, and it makes them make decisions on the fly that if they make the wrong decision, someone's behind you, and this is bad news. So if the play calls are executed well, if Trey Lance executes well, a lot of things may work in this offense. Folks, what works for us is getting a chance to serve you at Footballguys. It's going to be another great year together. We love sharing this experience with you. We're going to be back. Cecil and I will be doing some recaps later on today, and we'll be back through the cycle. And Chris, tell everyone about what you're going to be hosting this year and when they can see you.
You can find me on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX, and then helping out with some of the video shorts here at Footballguys, and of course a piece that I do each week about what we've learned, 3 things I learned from each week. You should find that on footballguys.com, dropping on Wednesdays, if I'm remembering correctly. So yeah, I'm around if you need me.
Yeah, Chris is there for you. You go around the corner, you look, there's Chris saying, I'm here to help you. We're here to help you, folks. We're here to help you because you are the classiest.